Numbers. I hate them. Purely because I'm just bad at maths. How many times in these videos has something like 122.845 been written as 854, or a calculation gone more wrong than putting fish fingers on a pizza? But at the same time, numbers in the last 9 years or so have formed part of a driver's identity. I did a video a couple of years ago on how Ferrari and the numbers 27 and 28 became a thing, but while I was sitting around last night I began wondering how a number painted in a change of colour became associated with one driver. You probably already know where this is going. Well, I mean, it is in the title. 44, 33, 14, 8, 17. Most Formula 1 fans will know who those numbers belong to. When F1 drivers come up into the sport, they have to choose a number, so long as it's not 1 or 17, or a number that's been used in the last 2 years. Either this year or next year, 7, which was Raikkonen, will be available again. 22, which was Button, was snapped up by Sonoda. Oh, and they can't have 0 either, which is what I would have had. Not because of Damon, but because it'd be funny. In my mind. But back in the days pre-1996, numbers stuck around because all that happened was the champion would swap numbers with whoever had number 1 last. Any new teams would just assign the next numbers in the sequence. It's how Ferrari ended up with 27 and 28 for so long, because in the 1980 season, Alan Jones, who carried 27, won the championship and Williams swapped numbers with Jody Scheckter and Ferrari. Post-1995, the numbers were assigned based on constructors' finishing positions, except if a driver moved. So in 1996, Schumacher had 1 and Irvine 2, Schumacher's old team Benetton had 3 and 4, then Hillett and Villeneuve had 5 and 6, despite Williams finishing second in the Constructors' Championship. In 1998, Williams had 1 and 2 because Villeneuve stayed at Williams, and so on and so forth. So in 1985, Williams hired Nigel Mansell from Lotus to be partnered with 1982 champion Keke Rosberg. Now, Rosberg was initially against Mansell joining the team because Rosberg had taken issues with Mansell's defensive driving at Dallas, which was also the same race when Nigel had pushed his Lotus over the line and collapsed, and he'd also been told bits and pieces about Il Leone that turned out to be wrong. So when Mansell arrived at Williams, the two actually got along, and got along well. The car they'd be given that year would be the FW10, a car that was a significant upgrade over the previous year's FW9 that had finished a lowly 6th in the Constructors' Championship the previous season. With the Honda engine being so binary on power output once the car was going, such as high-speed sections of track like at Silverstone, Hockenheim and Monza, the drivers loved the power the engine could produce, but it was far too spiky for Rosberg and Lafitte to handle properly, and would cause so many instability issues, including the problem of producing so much power that parts of the engine would get twisted. It also broke down a lot, which is, a bit suboptimal. It was also considered to be a death trap. Rosberg had pulled into the pits at the Austrian Grand Prix and told Patrick Head he refused to drive it any further because he thought he was going to have a terrible accident. Head accepted this. And if Patrick Head is not about to kick your head in over that, and Keke Rosberg himself has said the car is going to kill him, then it must have been bad. That 1984 season was dominated by the McLarens of Lauda and Prost, Lauda winning that previous season by just half a point, and McLaren winning that season meant that McLaren would be running 1 and 2 because they had the champion driver. Brabham took McLaren 7 and 8, and Williams had 5 and 6, which they had actually inherited at the end of 1983 when Piquet won the title. So as per the rules of Formula 1, the team had to paint a 5 and a 6 on their cars for the second year in succession. Rosberg had 6, while Mansell was given 5. And for the opening few races of the season, both of these numbers were white, and during the entirety of 1984 they were white, but the livery was slightly different. But because of how the cars appeared on long shots, particularly from somewhere like Brazil where the picture quality wasn't great because of how satellites worked at the time, that number 5 and number 6 looked quite similar, and it was hard to tell who was who. So Williams took Mansell's number 5 and painted it red to make it a bit more distinctive. When you add on top Murray Walker's enthusiastic commentary, he'd describe Mansell coming through turn 3 in the Williams Honda with that distinctive red number 5 on the nose. And there you have it. And Murray kept referring to it as Red 5. Plus, Red 5 had been Luke Skywalker's call sign in the original Star Wars film, so there was a bit of a cultural throwback there too. I know this is all a long-winded way just for this little bit of a section, but I might as well talk about the car as well because it's interesting. That car got Williams back to being competitive again. The FW10 was the first Williams with a full carbon fibre monocoque as opposed to aluminium, and was part of this whole technological shift towards carbon that is now standard for Formula 1. First used by McLaren in the early 80s, and now everybody was slowly migrating over. Carbon fibre is much stiffer than aluminium and also a lot lighter, and it was able to better withstand the sheer force these turbo engines were pumping out. Given that Formula 1 was fast approaching these mythical 1200 horsepower qualifying time bomb engines, 1200 horsepower engines that seem to gain another 500 horsepower every 10 years or so. Either way, the new Honda engine had been through a few modifications to make it more manageable and a bit less killy. When the Canadian Grand Prix rolled around, Honda brought a brand new version of the engine that had a smaller turbo on it to give a smoother power delivery. While the car would still suffer reliability issues, which were just part and parcel of racing in those days, the modifications that came in the late part of the season helped to turn Williams' fortune around and would be closer to the pace of the McLarens. Their sixth was immediately bumped up to a third. But it wasn't without other issues though. During that season, Mansell was involved in the fastest F1 crash in history as he shunted into a wall at Paul Ricard at about 200 miles an hour and somehow got away with just a concussion. But at that same race, Rosberg got pole and would be second behind Piquet's Brabham. Mansell returned in time for the Belgian Grand Prix and would get a second place there before winning his first ever race in 72 starts at the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch. Mansell Mania had begun, and when he'd got that distinctive red number 5 on the front of his car, it immediately became his trademark. The successors to the FW10, the FW11 and FW12 would win the Constructors' Championships in 86 and 87, before Honda switched to McLaren and went on a domination run between 88 and 91. A Williams driver could have won the 1986 title, but the competitiveness between Mansell and Piquet, Honda seeing Piquet as the number 1 driver, and being upset when Patrick Head, who had to run the team while Frank Williams was hospitalised after his car crash, didn't reel Mansell in. Prost would win the championship in 86, Piquet in 87, while Mansell would have to wait until 1992, but not after 2 years with Ferrari, where he'd run the number 27. But when Nigel retired from F1 at the end of 1992, that wasn't the end of Red 5. Such was the association with the number, he used it while at Newman Haas in kart during the 1993 season, which he won, and would then run a red number 1 during 1994. Although in Newman Haas, a red number was pretty much guaranteed anyway because Texaco and Kmart were the main sponsors. But when Mansell did a couple of races for Williams during the 1994 season, the number 2 that he'd got because Damon had 0 was painted red as a bit of a throwback. But it didn't stop there, because when Mansell did guest appearances for the Ford team during the 1998 BTCC season, his car number was 55, as James Thompson had the number 5 already. That number 55 was painted red, while typically the numbers on the sides of the cars were black. Later on in 2015, Sebastian Vettel would have the number 5 on his car as his chosen number. He also owns one of the red 5 chassis used during the 1992 season, which set him back an estimated £2.5 million. I'd say that's worth every penny considering that's the car he grew up idolising as a kid. So how much for one of those FW18s then? I could pay up to £30. But anyway, a look at how Mansell became known as Red 5 and also how the FW10 restored Williams' mid to late 80s fortunes. If this has been a "ooh, that's interesting, I didn't know that," then do like the video so I know I've done an interest. And for more stuff like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help out with the running of the channel and stuff like that, there are links to Patreon, Discord, socials, F1 Store affiliate and other bits and bobs down in the description for you. Or the super thanks if you just want to say thanks, but superly. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.